Look at me when I'm talking to you. The voice was sharp, calm, and used to being obeyed. It cut through the restaurant like a knife, and everything stopped. Forks froze midair. Conversations died. Even the soft jazz in the background felt out of place now. Everyone knew that voice. Everyone knew that man. Luca Moretti didn't raise his voice because he didn't need to. His presence alone had ended rooms before. But the woman sitting near the window didn't react at all. She stirred her coffee slowly, once, then again, like nothing important had just happened. Luca stepped closer, his shadow stretching across her table. I said. He repeated, firmer now, look at me. Finally, she lifted her head, not scared, not rushed, just annoyed. I heard you, she said evenly. I just didn't see a reason to stop what I was doing. A quiet gasp moved through the room. Men shifted in their seats. Someone whispered her fate under their breath. Luca studied her face, waiting for fear to arrive. It didn't. No shaking hands, no weak smile, just steady eyes looking back at him like he was late. Not dangerous. You spilled your drink on me, Luca said, his tone controlled, cold. An apology would be smart. The woman blinked once. You walked into me, she replied. That's not my mistake. The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that presses on your chest. Luca's men stiffened behind him, hands lowering closer to their jackets. Everyone knew this was the moment things usually ended badly. Luca had ended situations like this 100 times before. He felt the power sitting right there, ready. But something stopped him. Move, the woman added calmly, pointing at the chair he was blocking. You're in my way. That was it. That was the line no one crossed. Instead of reacting, Luca stepped back. The room didn't breathe. It stopped. The woman sat down again like nothing had happened, picked up her coffee, and took a slow sip. Luca felt something unfamiliar crawl up his spine. Not anger, not embarrassment, curiosity, real curiosity. You're not scared, he said quietly. She shrugged. Fear takes energy, she replied. I'm tired? One of Luca's men snapped. Do you know who? But she cut him off without even looking. I don't care. Luca turned and walked away before anyone else could speak. Outside, his men followed, confused, uneasy. Boss, one whispered, you want us to handle her. Luca stopped and looked back through the glass. The woman was laughing now, not about him, just living her life. No, Luca said slowly, leave her alone, because for the first time in years, Luca Moretti wasn't thinking about control or fear. He was thinking about a woman who treated him like he didn't exist, and that indifference hit harder than any threat ever could. Luca didn't speak for the rest of the night. The car moved through the city in silence, streetlights flashing across his face like passing thoughts he didn't want to have. His men sat stiff, unsure which version of him they were riding with, the one who punished disrespect, or the one who had just walked away from it. That didn't happen. Not with Luca Moretti. He replayed the moment again and again. The way she didn't rush, didn't explain, didn't even try to soften her words. She hadn't challenged him. That was the strange part. She had dismissed him. Indifference, he realized, was louder than defiance. Fear was familiar. Anger was easy. But being treated like noise, that was new. Find out who she is, he said finally, his voice calm but focused. No yelling, no threat, just instruction. One of the men nodded quickly. Yes, boss. Luca leaned back and closed his eyes, annoyed with himself for caring, even more annoyed that he couldn't stop. The next morning, the restaurant manager was already nervous when Luca walked in alone. No entourage, no show, just him. She comes in sometimes, the manager said quickly, wiping his hands. Always sits by the window, pays in cash, keeps to herself. Luca nodded, scanning the room. Empty, quiet. He sat at her table, not because it was hers, but because it faced the street the same way she had, like she was watching life instead of hiding from it. What's her name? Luca asked. The manager hesitated. Maya, he said. I think. Luca repeated it in his head. Maya. Simple, ordinary. Nothing like the fear-filled names people whispered about him. He stood and left without another word. Across town, Maya didn't know any of this. She was at work, headphones in, focused, living her life like the night before hadn't mattered at all. That irritated Luca more than insults ever had. By evening, his men had a file. Not thick, not impressive, no criminal history, no connections. Just a woman who worked, paid her rent, and minded her business. She's not trying to get your attention, one of them said carefully. Luca looked at the page again. That was the problem. Everyone else always was. He folded the file and handed it back. Don't touch her, he said. Don't scare her. Don't talk to her. The men exchanged looks. Then what? One asked. Luca paused. For the first time in years, he didn't have a clear answer. Then, he said slowly, we wait. Because whatever this was, it wasn't about control anymore. It was about a woman who didn't bend and a man who couldn't stop thinking about why. Waiting didn't calm Luca. It sharpened him. Days passed, then a week. And still Maya didn't change her routine. She walked the same streets, took the same train, sat at the same coffee shop near her office every morning, headphones on, eyes focused forward, not scanning for danger, not checking reflections. Anyone else in her position would have felt the shift in the air. Luca felt it himself when his presence moved through a room. But Maya didn't react, because she didn't know, and more importantly, she didn't care. That truth sat heavy in Luca's chest. He watched from a distance once, just once, standing across the street as she laughed with a coworker, free and unguarded. There was no performance in her, no calculation, and that unsettled him more than enemies ever had. Power had always bent people toward him. It had never failed, until now. Luca found himself remembering things he hadn't thought about in years. His mother, working late nights, too tired to fear the men who circled their neighborhood. His younger self, invisible until he learned how to make people look twice. Fear had built his reputation. Control had kept it alive. But Maya had stepped into his space and treated him like furniture, present, but unimportant. That wasn't bravery. That was something deeper. She's not impressed, Luca muttered one night, staring out at the city from his office. One of his men nodded carefully. Some people don't want power, he said. Luca scoffed. Everyone wants power. Then he paused. The room fell to quiet. Don't they? He added, more to himself than anyone else. The next time they crossed paths, it wasn't planned. It never is. Luca stepped into the elevator of a downtown building, phone pressed to his ear, already annoyed, when the doors slid open and there she was, Maya. Same calm posture, same distant eyes. She didn't look up right away. When she did, there was no flicker of recognition, no fear rushing in late, just a brief glance, polite and blank. She stepped in, pressed her floor, and turned back to her phone. The doors closed. Silence filled the small space. Luca felt his pulse shift, slow but heavy. He could have spoken, could have reminded her who he was. Instead, he said nothing. When the elevator stopped, Maya stepped out without a word, without a look back. The doors closed again, and Luca stood alone, staring at his reflection in the metal walls. For the first time in his life, someone had walked away from him without knowing she'd done anything remarkable. And that was the moment Luca understood the danger, not to his power, but to himself. Because indifference wasn't just pulling him in, it was changing him. Luca tried to go back to who he was before her. He filled his days with meetings, numbers, quiet threats spoken in clean rooms. He signed papers without reading them. He listened without hearing. At night, the city lights pressed against the windows of his office, and still, his mind drifted back to that elevator. How small the space had felt, how normal she had been, how easily she had stepped away. He hated that he admired it. Respect, in his world, was taken or enforced. Maya's indifference hadn't asked permission. It simply existed. I want to see her again, he said one evening, breaking a long silence. His men looked up, careful. By accident, Luca added. No pressure, no shadow. That was new language for him. They nodded anyway. The opportunity came on a bright afternoon at a small bookstore cafe downtown. Luca walked in alone, dressed down, nothing that announced him. Maya was there, seated near the window with a book open and a coffee cooling beside it. He felt the room tilt not because of fear, but because he was suddenly aware of himself. He ordered quietly and took the seat across from her, leaving a respectful distance. She glanced up, recognized him this time, and then nothing. No change in her face, no shift in posture. "You again," she said, not unkindly. "This city's small." Luca smiled despite himself. "Smaller than people think," he replied. She returned to her page. He waited, unsure for the first time whether to speak. "I didn't mean to bump into you," he said finally. "I don't usually do that." Maya closed the book halfway, considering him like a weather report. "I don't usually care," she said. "But you stood in my space," he nodded. An apology sat on his tongue, rare, heavy. "I'm not used to being ignored," he admitted. The truth surprised him as it left his mouth. Maya studied him, then leaned back. "That sounds like a you problem," she said simply. There was no cruelty in it, just honesty. Luca laughed once, low and surprised. No one had spoken to him like that in years. "Maybe," he said, "but I wanted to say I'm sorry." She paused, then nodded once. "Okay, nothing more. No gratitude? No invitation." Luca stood, leaving her space intact. As he walked out, he realized something unsettled and real had happened. For the first time, he hadn't tried to control the outcome. And for the first time, that felt right. After that day, something shifted between them, but not in the way Luca understood shifts. There were no late-night calls, no dramatic confrontations, no sudden closeness. Maya didn't change. That was the part that stayed with him. She didn't soften. She didn't lean in. She didn't pull away either. She simply continued living the same quiet life, and somehow that steadiness pulled Luca closer than obsession ever could. He began to notice the way she existed in the world, how she listened more than she spoke, how she didn't rush to fill silence, how she chose where to spend her attention like it mattered. People around Luca always wanted something: information, protection, approval. Maya wanted nothing from him. That made every small interaction feel earned instead of taken. When they crossed paths again at the cafe weeks later, she nodded once and went back to her writing. Luca sat 2 tables away, pretending to read the news while watching the way she tapped her pen when she thought. He wasn't hunting. He wasn't planning. He was learning how to be present without control, and that scared him more than enemies ever had. His men noticed the change before he did. Meetings ended earlier. Orders were shorter. Anger didn't flare as fast. One of them finally said it out loud. "You're distracted." Luca looked up, calm. "I'm focused," he corrected. But later that night, alone, he admitted the truth. He was tired of being feared, tired of the distance that came with power. Maya didn't see him as a symbol or a threat. She saw him as a man who had taken up space without asking, and she had corrected him without raising her voice. That stayed with him. The next time they spoke, it was brief and ordinary, about the weather, about the bad coffee, about nothing important. And yet, Luca walked away from that conversation lighter than he had after any victory. He realized then that infatuation wasn't about desire. It was about relief. Maya didn't ask him to be better. She didn't demand change. Her indifference simply showed him who he could be without the armor. And for a man who had lived behind walls his entire life, that quiet possibility felt dangerous and irresistible. Luca started making choices that didn't make sense to the people around him. And that's how they knew something real was happening. He stopped sending others to handle things that didn't need force. He showed up himself. He listened. He let silence sit without filling it. The city noticed. Rumors shifted. Not weak or different. Power doesn't vanish. It evolves. And Luca felt it changing inside him, too. The old version of him would have taken Maya's attention by pressure or charm or fear. This version waited. He learned her routine without invading it. He learned when to step back. The discipline of restraint became its own kind of strength. One afternoon, they ended up walking out of the bookstore cafe at the same time. No plan, no setup, just timing. "You heading east?" Luca asked, keeping his distance. Maya nodded. For a bit, they walked side by side. Not touching, not rushing. The city moved around them like water around stone. People usually try harder, Maya said after a minute. When they want something. Luca smiled faintly. I've tried harder my whole life, he replied. It never brought the right things closer. That honesty surprised them both. Maya stopped at the crosswalk and looked at him, not curious, not impressed, just attentive. You don't seem like someone who's used to not being obeyed, she said. Luca didn't deny it. I'm used to being misunderstood, he said instead. The light changed. They crossed. He didn't reach for her arm. He didn't guide her through the crowd. He let her walk at her pace. That mattered to her more than any grand gesture. A few steps later, she spoke again. If this is a game, she said. I'm not playing. Luca nodded. It's not, he said. Games need winners. I'm tired of winning. She studied him, then continued walking. They didn't exchange numbers. They didn't make plans. And yet, Luca felt something settle like a door closing behind him. Not trapping him, but keeping the noise out. For the first time, he understood that indifference wasn't a challenge to conquer. It was a boundary to respect. And respecting it didn't make him smaller. It made him honest. The distance between Luca and Maya stayed measured, and that was what made it real. Days passed without messages, weeks without plans, and yet, when they crossed paths, something quiet held. Luca noticed how she never asked where he'd been or what he did. She didn't test him. She didn't dig. That restraint became a mirror, forcing him to look at himself without defenses. One evening, trouble found him the way it always had, dulled alliances pressing, old habits tugging. A dispute needed his name to end it. He went, handled it with words instead of threats, and walked away earlier than expected. Later, he sat alone in his car, hands resting on the wheel, realizing he didn't want to bring that weight anywhere near her. Not because she asked, but because he finally cared where he placed his shadow. When they met again, it was rain that did it. A sudden storm sent people rushing for cover, and Maya ducked into the awning outside a closed shop. Luca joined her, careful to keep space. The rain softened the city, slowed it. You don't hover, she said after a moment, watching the water beat along the curb. Most people do. Luca nodded. Hovering is another way of pushing, he said. She glanced at him, considering. You're changing, she said, not accusing, not impressed, observing. Luca didn't argue. I am, he replied. But not for you. She smiled faintly at that. Good, she said. I don't want to be the reason someone becomes something they can't keep. The rain eased. She stepped away first, leaving him there with the truth he didn't want to forget. That night, Luca made a decision no one else saw. He closed doors that didn't need to stay open. He delegated power he'd clutched too tightly. He chose distance from the noise. Not because it was safer, but because it was cleaner. The next time he saw Maya, he told her something he'd never said out loud. If you ever ask me to step away, he said. Steady, I will. Maya studied him, then shook her head. I won't ask, she said. I'll just keep watching. And that was the line that changed everything. Because Luca understood then, this wasn't about winning her attention. It was about becoming a man who didn't need to chase it. Time did what power never could. It revealed the truth slowly. Luca didn't announce changes. He lived them. The city adjusted without understanding why. Meetings became shorter. Decisions became quieter. Fear still followed his name, but it no longer led the room. When people tested him, he answered with restraint. When they expected force, he offered clarity. And somewhere between those choices, Luca realized the most shocking thing of all. He felt lighter. Not weaker, lighter. Maya never celebrated this shift. She didn't reward it with affection or praise. She noticed, and that was enough. One afternoon, months after their first collision, they sat on opposite ends of a park bench, sharing the same patch of sun without touching. You don't chase anymore, she said, eyes on the trees. Luca nodded. I don't need to, he replied. I know where I stand. She turned to him then, really looked at him, and for the first time there was warmth there, not excitement, not or recognition. Then you're finally present, she said. He smiled, not proud, just calm. They didn't rush into anything. No dramatic declarations. No promises carved in stone. What grew between them was quieter and stronger than obsession. Luca learned how to listen without preparing a response. Maya learned how to let someone close without losing herself. They chose honesty over intensity, boundaries over thrill. When Luca spoke about his past, he didn't defend it. When Maya spoke about her limits, she didn't apologize for them. And in that space, something rare formed: not control, not submission, but respect. People around them noticed the difference without understanding it. The notorious boss was still there, but he no longer filled rooms by force. He filled them by choice. And the woman who once ignored him didn't become a prize, she remained herself. That was the point. Moral: power craves attention, but respect grows from restraint. Fear can make people obey, but indifference can make a man look inward. When someone refuses to be impressed, they don't diminish you, they reveal who you are without the noise. True transformation doesn't begin when others fear you. It begins when you no longer need them to.